Hey, listeners, ready to transform your sleep? Cozy Earth is all about lasting luxury and comfort. Their bamboo sheets have been called the world's softest sheets, cooling, moisture wicking, and unbelievably soft. And I can tell you they get better with every wash. And they have a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty.
But it doesn't stop there. They have bath, sleepwear, loungewears, and even skincare. Free shipping on orders of $50 or more.
Make sure you go to cozyearth.com, use our code INFOGO at checkout to save 21% off. You can find all of this in the show notes. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William.
And I'm Kat,
And that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity wherever you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have no idea where this topic came from. But
I don't know, but I like it.
yeah, okay. Maybe you put it on the shopping list. I don't know. So before the open world games, right? You didn't explore a world, you progressed through a sequence. Let's take early arcade and console designs. Games like Pac-Man that came out in 1980 or Donkey Kong that came out in 1981. They didn't offer space to wander around. They offered patterns. You learned movement, timing, repetition. The environment was fixed, almost like a mechanical puzzle, that reset with every time you blinked.
Even early platformers like Super Mario Bros. In 1985, while revolutionary in flow and design, still moved in a strict direction. Left to right, World 1-1 to World 1-2. The illusion of adventure existed, but the structure was still a guided tunnel with scenery painted along the walls.
First of all, you could only go right.
Right. Right to left my butt.
Yeah. And Donkey Kong, you could only go up.
Mm-hmm.
And Pac-Man was just a square and you just kind of moved around inside the square. You didn't go from screen to screen. Anyway, so then there were early exceptions that kind of hinted to something different. And that game would be The Legend of Zelda in 1986, which was amazing and still is. And it broke the strict rhythm of, the progression. Suddenly, the player was dropped into an overworld with caves, forest, secrets that didn't demand a single path, and you could wander around. You could even get lost, and I've done that. You could stumble into danger or discover something without being told where to go next.
That moment mattered because it disrupted the expectation that games must always guide the player step by step. Earlier still, games like Metroid in 1986 layered exploration into progress. You would revisit old areas with new abilities, turning space into something that evolved in meaning over time rather than being consumed and discarded. Even Dragon Quest in 1986 and early Japanese RPGs began experimenting with overworld maps that connected towns, caves, and dungeons into a larger, navigable structure rather than isolated stages.
RPG stands for role playing games. It's a type of game where you control a character who grows over time through story progression, exploration, experience, and upgrades, often inside a larger narrative world. But these still were not fully open world games. They were structured journeys inside bounded systems. The player still could, it still followed intent. The world was not yet truly open, but it was beginning to crack open at the seams.
Before open world design existed as a concept, exploration already existed in primitive, fragile forms. Not in graphics, not in scale, but in imagination stitched together by language. One of the earliest breakthroughs was Colossal Cave Adventure in 1976. The game did not show you a world, it really just described one.
You would type something like go north or take lamp, and the game would respond with text. A damp passage, a twisting tunnel, a faint echo somewhere deeper inside the cave. The world was not drawn, it was inferred. What mattered was not what you saw, but what you could remember. There was no mini map, no compass marker, no quest, that pointed you forward. If you got lost, You stayed lost until you mentally reconstructed where you'd been. So the cave existed in your mind as a growing internal sketch. Wow, that actually sounds like a kind of a fun game.
Sounds stressful.
Maybe.
This is where something important begins to form, though. Spatial memory becomes gameplay. Shortly after, other text adventures expanded the idea, like Zork, late 1970s into the early 80s. It refined the structure. Instead of just moving through space, players learned the language of space. Rooms had identity. West of Houst, forest clearing, troll room. These were not levels. They were named places, stitched together like a mental map you had to carry yourself.
Yeah, players kind of they started to understand the game world was not sequence of challenges, but connected geography. Even without visuals, there was a sense of being somewhere. And that sense was doing something new.
Early systems, like Adventure of York, also introduced the idea of persistence within a space. Items could be dropped and later found again, paths could be revisited, and the world did not reset immediately after interaction. It remembered, if even only in simple ways. That alone was a philosophical shift in design.
Contrast with arcade era logic, where everything existed only in the moment of play. In these text worlds, continuity started to matter more than performance. Even more interesting was how players filled in the gaps, right? A dark cave was not just a description, it became a fully imagined space shaped by the player's personal fears, expectations, and memory. Two players could experience the same text and construct entirely different worlds in their mind. Dungeons and Dragons.
Right? In a strange way, these early games were more open than many later geographical ones. Because the world had no fixed visual limits, it expanded to the boundaries of imagination rather than hardware. This is where the key idea takes root. The world's no longer just a sequence of challenges, it's a space that can be mentally mapped, revisited, and explored in nonlinear ways.
There's still no cameras following a character through a 3D landscape, but something more important is starting to form beneath the surface of design history, right? The idea that a game space can exist as a continuous environment rather than just a chain of isolated levels. And once that idea appears, even in text form, it never fully disappears from gaming again.
Early RPG design is where the idea of a world that keeps going without you starts to take shape in a more structured, mechanical way. The imagination of text adventures begins turning into systems, rules, and simulated societies. A key example is the Ultima series, especially Ultima 3 Exodus in 1983 and Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar in 1985. These games began to treat the world as something more than a backdrop for the player. They presented towns, economies, NPCs, and moral systems that existed as part of a larger ongoing structure. And NPC stands for non player character.
It's any character in a game you don't control. The game controls the NPC, often through simple scripts, and now with AI, they can be shopkeepers, enemies, quest givers, or background characters that help make the world feel alive. In earlier games, NPCs were static. Shopkeeper existed only to sell items. A guard existed only to block progress. But in Ultima, towns felt like functioning places. You would enter a settlement and encounter different behaviors depending on context. Shops opened and closed in ways that suggested time passing. So NPCs repeated information, but their placement and presence created the impression of routine.
Even if the simulation was simple by modern standards, the implication was powerful. The world does not pause when the player leaves. This was a break from earlier design logic. In arcade and early action games, nothing existed beyond the current screen or level state. Once you left a stage, it effectively ceased to matter. In Ultima, however, towns were persistent nodes in a larger network. You could leave, return later, and still find them intact with the same world logic.
Ultima 4 pushed this further by shifting focus from pure progression to moral simulation. NPCs were no longer just functional objects, they were tied into a broader ethical system. where player behavior had consequences across the world. This introduced the idea that the world responds not only by movement, but by values. Have you ever
Oof.
played Ultima 4?
Nope.
I haven't either. I want to go play it though.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty cool. Around the same era, Wizardry came out in 1981, and early Might and Magic titles also contributed to this evolution by creating party based systems that operated inside persistent dungeon structures. Even though many of these environments were still grid based or segmented, they maintained continuity across exploration. You weren't just clearing isolated rooms, you were moving through connected, remembered spaces. Now, what begins to emerge across these games is a subtle but important shift in thinking.
The game world, it's no longer a sequence of challenges arranged for the player. It is a container that continues to exist between interactions. Even if NPCs routines were simple loops and towns were limited in behavior, the illusion was enough to change expectations. Players started to assume continuity. They began to expect that places had identity outside of immediate interaction. This is the real turning point in early living system design. The player is no longer the center of existence. They are the participant entering a system that already has structure, rhythm, and continuity. So the world is no longer paused until interaction with it, right? It's already moving the moment the player arrives. And Kat, I'll say before we get into the sense of infinity, Coke.
Pepsi.
We'll be right back.
Now that
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Ready to turn an ordinary day into an unforgettable adventure? Check out QR Hunter. It lets you create custom treasure hunts with reusable QR code tiles. You can personalize clues, puzzles, photo challenges. You can do it all in just a few minutes. It's perfect for birthday parties, family game nights, classrooms, parks, team building events, or if you just want to have family fun. The free QR Hunter app, it works with any smart device. The adventure, it never really ends. You can search for QR Hunter on Amazon, or you can simply click the link in the show notes. But let the adventure start today.
back. A major leap in open world thinking arrives not from fantasy landscapes or medieval towns, but from space itself. Elite in 1984 redefined what a game world could be by building something unprecedented for its time, a procedurally generated galaxy. Instead of handcrafting every planet, star system, and encounter, the game used mathematical rules to create them on the fly.
The result was a universe that felt enormous compared to anything that had ever came before it. Players could travel between star systems, dock at space stations, trade goods, upgrade their ships, and engage in combat with pirates or military forces. Each system had its own identity, but that identity was produced through generation rather than manual design.
Now, what made this so important was not just scale, but structure. In earlier games, space was limited by design. Even large RPG worlds or adventure maps eventually revealed their edges. You could reach a final dungeon, a last town, a known boundary. The world, no matter how complex, was finite and authored in full. Elite disrupted that expectation.
Its galaxy contained so many possible systems that players could not meaningfully perceive an end, right? Exploration became open ended, not because the developers wrote endless content, but because they built a system that could, well, continuously produce new spaces. This created a psychological shift in how players experience digital worlds.
And instead of asking, what is the next level, players began asking, where can I go next? The game introduced early versions of what would later become core open world principles. Space is a system rather than a map, exploration as a process rather than a sequence, and scale defined by possibility rather than handcrafted detail. Even though Elite's individual systems were relatively simple by modern standards, the overall effect was powerful. A player could jump from system to system, encountering trade opportunities, danger, or empty space, and still feel like the universe extended beyond what they could ever really fully see.
And this is where the fundamental idea of open world design starts to take shape. A world does not need to be fully authored to feel complete. It only needs rules that allow it to generate meaningful space. Elite, well, it did not just make a big game world, it suggested that bigness itself could be simulated. And once that idea entered the game design, well, the ceiling of scale was just permanently broken, shattered, no ceiling.
Crash, smash, done. Burning down the house. Anyway, I don't know. That's where my brain went. Sorry.
Um,
So now we're entering the Legend of Zelda in 1986. It takes the scattered ideas of exploration that came before it and turns them into something structured, readable, and deeply playable. It doesn't fully abandon linear design, but it loosens its grip enough to create a new kind of freedom structured exploration inside of a connected world.
yeah, instead of pushing the player through a strict sequence of levels, Zelda presents a top-down overworld that acts as a living map. Forest, mountains, caves, lakes, dungeons. They're not isolated stages. They are connected regions, all existing side by side in a continuous space the player can move through at will. And Zelda is the most amazing game ever made.
Yes.
Okay,
And you
all
must
of
play it on a Nintendo 64.
yeah, all of them. Well, you can play it on the Switch now.
Shh.
I have them all on the. Oh wait, did I just put my nerdiness out there?
Yeah. Yeah, you did. But I mean, same. Have you played the new ones?
I have. I'm still playing the old ones. Like I'm just rediscovering stuff on the old. I'm so sorry, but I do play the old Zeldas. I just love that. I know it's so pixelated and everything like that, but I do love them.
They are iconic. Why? How you cannot not love them?
Sure. The Legend of Zelda.
From the beginning, the player is not locked into a single path. You can head north into dangerous territory, wander into hidden caves, or even stumble into stronger enemies far earlier than intended. The game does not fully prevent exploration, it gently resists it. And that still carries through in the new versions of Zelda.
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild and
Zelda, eh, the design creates something new, right? Guided freedom. A key example is how dungeons are distributed across the world. They are not presented in a fixed order. Players can discover them through exploration, curiosity, or accidental movement. One player might find a dungeon early and struggle through it, because the player's underpowered. Another might arrive later with stronger equipment and have a totally different experience. And that's what makes Zelda so great.
yes. Now, the world begins to behave less like a sequence and more like a spatial puzzle. Another important shift is how secrets are embedded directly into geography. Burnable bushes, hidden caves behind waterfalls, bombable walls, and invisible paths all turn the environment itself into language. The player is not just navigating space, they're learning how the space communicates.
Progression is no longer only about defeating enemies or clearing levels. It's about noticing patterns in the world and interpreting what the design is suggested without really stating it. Even combat and items reinforce this structure. New tools do not simply make the player stronger, they just unlock new ways of moving through the same space. A bomb doesn't, well, defeat enemies. It reveals hidden passages. A ladder, it's not just, aid in traversal. It changes how regions are connected.
Now, this creates a loop where knowledge becomes as important as ability. The more the player understands the world's logic, the more freedom they gain within it. This is where Zelda becomes more than just an adventure game. It becomes an early model of open world thinking. The player is no longer moving through a sequence of design challenges. They are interrupting a connected space where discovery is the primary reward system. The world is not telling the player exactly where to go, it's offering a geography of possibilities and letting curiosity decide the route. This marks one of the first mainstream moments where open world logic becomes visible to a wide audience.
A game world is not just a path to complete, it's a space to understand. As hardware improved through the late 1980s and early 1990s, developers ran into a new kind of limitation. It was no longer just about whether a world could exist, but it was about how large it could feel without overwhelming the system that was holding that world together. Memory processing power and storage space, well, they were still tight constraints. Entire worlds had to be carefully compressed, reused, and sifted together with limited building blocks. So instead of building truly massive environments, designers began focusing on something more subtle, the feeling of scale.
This is where perception starts to matter more than size. One of the most common techniques was map looping. A player walking far enough in one direction would eventually re enter a familiar or mirrored space, creating the illusion of continuity. The world felt larger than it physically was because it never clearly ended. It bent backward on itself in ways that disguised its boundaries. Another method was dense environmental storytelling. Instead of spreading content across huge distances, developers packed meaning into small areas. A single ruined village can imply a larger fallen kingdom. A locked castle gate could suggest an entire unseen political structure behind it. The player's imagination filled in the missing scale.
Games like The Legend of Zelda and later RPG overworlds use this approach heavily. A small forest on a map might represent something far larger in narrative terms, with its edges suggesting depth that the player never fully sees. So, constrained traversal also played a major role. Mountains, rivers, and impassable terrain, they were not just obstacles. They were tools for shaping perception. By limiting where the player could go, developers, well, they could control how the world unfolded in their mind. A winding path between cliffs could feel like a vast journey, even if it was only a few screens long.
RPGs such as Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest II, which both came out in 1987, began refining overworld travel into a rhythm of long distance movement punctuated by tightly designed encounters. The overworld map gave a continuous sense of scale, even though the actual playable space was highly compressed and structured.
This era also saw the rise of connective illusion. Design, they were transitions between areas that were fully crafted to avoid breaking immersion. Fade ins, scrolling maps, and consistent visual themes, they really helped stitch the separate zones into something that felt continuous rather than segmented. So the key discovery during this period was deceptively simple. Players do not experience raw data, they experience interpretation. A world does not need to be physically large to feel expansive. It needs to maintain continuity, suggestion, and flow.
This principle becomes foundational for everything that follows in open world design. Once developers learned how to stretch perception beyond physical limits, the focus shifted from building bigger maps to building worlds that feel uninterrupted, even when they're carefully constrained behind the scenes. Well, this time I think I'm going to go get some lemon water.
Lemon water?
Yeah.
No Pepsi?
I have to stay hydrated too.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna get a Coke though.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Now that we're back, there's Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001, which really transforms open world design into a fully realized 3D system. Instead of moving through separate levels or isolated areas, the player is placed inside Liberty City, a continuous urban environment where everything exists in the same space at once. Streets, districts, traffic, pedestrians, and missions are all part of a single connected world.
The key change is structure. Earlier games still tended to guide players through, defined sequences. GTA or Grand Theft Auto 3, this really removes that sense of separation because the city does not feel like a series of stages. It feels like a place that continues regardless of what the player is doing. Missions still exist and provide direction, but they are no longer the only focus. They become optional pathways inside of a larger simulation. A player can choose to follow objectives or just simply explore, experiment, or cause chaos within the city.
What makes this moment important is agency. The player's no longer just moving through a designed content. They're acting inside a system that reacts in real time. Traffic flows, pedestrians behave independently, and police respond dynamically to players' actions. These systems interact with each other in ways that can produce unexpected outcomes, such as escalating chases or spontaneous disruptions in the city's rhythm.
This creates emergent gameplay where the experience is not fully scripted but shaped by how the system combines in the moment. This is the point where open world design becomes carefully defined. The focus, well, it shifts from structured progression to freedom within a living, reactive environment. As open worlds evolve, the biggest design shift is internal because developers they're moving away from scripted sequences and towards systems that can generate behavior dynamically.
You sounded like Yoda.
Dynamically.
Yeah.
There is no try, only do.
NPCs gain routines, guards patrol, civilians react to danger. AI systems begin to simulate decision making rather than follow static instructions. Environmental systems like weather, physics, and time cycles create constant change in the background. This leads to a new kind of gameplay structure. Rather than fixed events, the world produces outcomes through interaction between systems. A single action can trigger cascading reactions across multiple layers of simulation. I thought that's where it was heading, just say it.
A simple confrontation can escalate into a wider response involving AI behavior, environmental disruption, and unintended chain reactions. So if you hit that pedestrian in GTA, the police are coming for you. The key change is design philosophy. Be- because developers, they stop asking what happens here and start asking how does the system behave under pressure? So the world becomes less like a scripted story and more like a functioning machine. GTA 3 was pretty awesome.
Yeah. You know,
I,
nah,
I was
go
just gonna
ahead.
say I remember when it came out, like, it was the rave, and now I mean I don't play it now. My kids do. My older ones do anyway.
Yeah, I was definitely not allowed to play that in 2001. I would have been 6.
Yeah, but I know this next game that we're gonna talk about is probably one of your favorites.
It is The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim came out in 2011. It represents a hybrid moment in open world design where handcrafted storytelling and systematic simulation are fully fused inside a single world. And it could take you forever to actually finish the game, like 100% it.
Mm.
Anyway, Skyrim's world is built from detailed regions, cities, dungeons, and wilderness areas that feel cohesive and continuous. But unlike purely systemic sandboxes, it is also filled with authored quests, scripted narrative arcs, and carefully designed encounters.
But I've never played Skyrim, but it sounds
I
really fun.
10 out of 10 recommend.
Okay. The player exists inside both layers at once, right? NPCs follow daily routines, cities feel active with merchants, guards, and travelers, all moving through their predictable patterns. At the same time, quest lines unfold through carefully written story structures that guide the player through major narrative beats. What makes Skyrim important is not just its size, but how these systems overlap. A player might be following a quest into a remote dungeon when a random dragon attack interrupts the journey. A Civil War event, well, it might unfold in the background while the player is engaged in an unrelated storyline. These interactions are not always scripted together, but they collide inside the same living system. Now, this sounds like something I would play.
You should. You should play it.
Okay.
This creates the feeling that the world is not centered on the player, even though the player is deeply embedded within it. Freedom and narrative coexist without fully controlling each other. The result is a world that feels both authored and alive at the same time. Skyrim becomes a defining example of open world design at its most balanced state. Structured storytelling embedded into systemic unpredictable. Uh, what?
I mean, it's either I can't pronounce words or you can't pronounce words.
It's never just yeah. Yeah. Or say functional sentences like because what? Skyrim becomes a defining example of open world design at its most balanced state. Structured storytelling embedded inside systemic unpredictability.
Next comes a game that I do not understand, but all of my kids love, and I know it's a very popular game.
I also
Mine,
love it.
you love this game?
I do.
Okay. Minecraft, which came out in 2011. And this pushes open world design away from hybrid storytelling and toward pure system driven creation. There is no required narrative structure, no fixed progression path, no mandatory endpoint that defines completion. The world is reduced to fundamental components: terrain, resources, physics, rule, and survival logic.
That's if you play in survival mode.
See, you got a leg up on me on this one. This is one game I just okay, I guess this separates our generations here because this is a game I do not understand. It is so pixelated. It looks like something I played back when I was a kid.
That's the point. That's the
Oh,
whole point.
all right.
But, they've built computers to play Minecraft inside of Minecraft.
This sounds like a rabbit hole that we could go down.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. It is fascinating.
Let's jump back to the surface.
At first, the experience is survival based. The player gathers materials, craft tools, and builds shelter, but very quickly, survival becomes just the starting layer. Once the systems are understood, the world becomes fully transformable. Players can reshape terrain, construct massive structures, build automated systems, or completely redesign the environment. The world is no longer something to move through, it becomes something to manipulate. This represents a fundamental shift in design philosophy.
Skyrim and similar games ask the player to inhabit a world. Minecraft, well, it asks the player to rewrite it. Even progression becomes optional. The Ender Dragon provides a possible goal, but it's not structurally required. Many players ignore it entirely. And instead, they focus on building, experimentation, or long term creative projects. This is where open world design reaches its most abstract form. The world is no longer just a simulation or a narrative space, it just becomes a medium. I I have tried to play Minecraft. My kids have tried to show me, but next up is probably the one game that I could play forever.
Yeah, this one's pretty good. Red Dead Redemption 2, which came out in 2018, it represents a peak in how far environmental simulation can be pushed inside an open world. The world is built to feel continuously alive, even when the player is not interacting with it directly. Whether systems shift gradually across regions, changing visibility, terrain conditions, and even how characters behave, rain turns trails into mud. Snow slows movement and reshapes travel entirely. Heat affects clothing and stamina, and subtly altering how the world must be navigated.
Wildlife, it even operates on its own layered ecosystem. Animals hunt, flee, migrate, and respond to both environmental conditions and human presence. Predator and prey interactions occur independently of the player, creating moments that feel observed rather than triggered. And if you've ever played Red Dead and had the deer or the buck come and just hit you out of nowhere,
Right.
oh, that is so hard. Anyway, NPC behavior is also deeply contextual. Towns feel active because routines are, well, they're going on in the background at the same time. People wake, work, gather, and sleep according to internal schedules. Dialogue and reactions change depending on your reputation or location and previous actions. So if you rob the bank, they're gonna tell you about it. Or if you beat the guy up in the middle of town, they're gonna be like, "Why did you beat up Tommy so bad?"
Right. Now, what makes this system significant is not any single feature, but how everything overlaps. A passing storm affects travel, travel affects timing, timing affects encounters, encounters affect reputation, and reputation affects future interactions. Small systems stack into larger narrative consequences without needing explicit scripting for every outcome. This creates a strong sense of living ecology. The world's no longer just a stage for missions or exploration, it becomes a functioning environment where systems, behavior, and narrative are layered together in one continuous experience.
The player is not just moving through space, they are moving through a simulation that responds at multiple levels at once. So, as open world game design expands, it starts to build its strength and begins to reveal structural changes. Larger worlds do not automatically create deeper experiences. In some cases, excessive scale can dilute focus. When content is spread too widely, exploration, well, it can lose momentum and discovery can feel repetitive rather than meaningful. I would agree with that.
Right.
Red Dead just, to me, is probably one of the best games I've ever played.
You should try Skyrim.
Okay, I'll play Skyrim.
Many open world games begin to rely on repeated activity structures such as collectible tasks, repeated objectives, or similar mission patterns across different regions. While these systems help fill space, they can also reduce the sense of uniqueness that exploration originally created. There's also a psychological effect. When a world offers too many possible directions at once, players can experience decision fatigue. Instead of feeling free, they may feel uncertain about what matters most. Freedom becomes less about possibility and more about filtering noise.
And this creates a design tension at the center of modern open world development. How large can a world become before it stops feeling intentional? How much freedom can be given before structure becomes necessary again to guide, meaning? The challenge is no longer building bigger worlds, it's balancing freedom with direction, scale, and with focus, and simulation with purpose.
Now, open world games changed more than structure. They changed how players relate to virtual space. From linear progression to living systems, games involved into environments that simulate continuity and agency. Even when the game's not being played, the idea remains.
The world continues, and the player, when they return, it's not restarting at a level. They are re-entering a place that was already in motion. And that would have been great for Mario instead of having to start all over again.
Oh man, you're not lying. But a lot of games were like that then.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Frogger and I can't remember the Pong and Combat, whatever that was, and then Mario was like, man, can't wait to play Mario and Duck Hunt. And did you know on Duck Hunt, you could have took the second controller and moved the ducks?
What?
Yeah, I
No, I
know,
had no
right?
idea.
Doing research for this, figured that out, and I was like, you gotta be kidding. I want to go back to when I was a child and tell my younger me, grab the second controller.
Just quietly, trust me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. No, I don't think I ever really. Well, I know what Duck Hunt is, but I don't remember playing it. Now, I like what Dr. Mario was fun too. I also like Tetris.
Yeah, and I had a Game Boy and I like that. Yeah.
So yeah, I had a Game Boy and we played Pokemon.
I'm trying to think what games I had on my Tetris was on my Game Boy. Ninja Guardian was on there. I can't remember. I don't remember. That was so long ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you'd like to support the show, you can do so at Patreon or take advantage of our sponsors. Those links are in the show notes.
And as always, Kat and I want to say thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or just tuning in, thank you.
Yeah, and you can join the Facebook group at Info on the Go,
Over there, you get to know us.
or you can just ask us a question.
But follow us wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah, send us some fan mail using that link in the show notes, or leave a review.
Leaving that review really does help others find us. You can also email William or myself directly at
Info on the Go podcast at gmail.com.
and all of that is in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious. This one was really fun.
Yeah.
Hey, listen up. All of my workforce friends out there, whether you're ranchers, farmers, or you just need a pair of good leather gloves, look no further than Bare Knuckles. The best leather gloves ever made, featuring a patent design crafted for natural curve of the fingers. These gloves deliver a perfect fit, superior protection, and all-day comfort. Made from premium leather, right now get an exclusive 15% off, and you can find that at buybareknuckles.com, but make sure you use our code INFOGO at checkout. You can find that link in the show notes. Upgrade your hands, and remember, every purchase, well, it supports the show, so thank you.
If you love unforgettable treats, you've got to try Molly B's Gourmet Cookies. These aren't your average cookies. Molly B's brings bold, artisan crafted cookies straight to your pantry. We're talking chocolate, cherry, and amaretto and Be Cordial. Earl Grey, lavender, white chocolate, and lemon glaze in the tea. Even maple, bacon, whiskey, and white chocolate in the Boss Man. Founded by a single mom from Alaska, Molly Bees has become a national sensation. You get 10% off any product using our code INFOGO at mollybees.com. Find the link in the show notes.